Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Lifestyles of the Rich in Faith Church. Lifestyles YouTube channel. Kerwin and Brenda Jordan here. We greet you. We welcome you once again in our continual series on prayer, the secret prayer life of Jesus specifically, is what we started out with. So I want to continue and share some more insights as the Lord has given to me with everybody. And I'm going to start in Matthew chapter 14. It'll probably be the only place I could go. As I was preparing today, I've been preparing actually since the last time we got together. And, to get through this entire chapter, it would take a little bit of time. So I'm hopeful to we'll just see how far we go. Okay. I think the last time we got together, I shared some things about prayer patterns of Jesus. And I mentioned about in Luke about, I emphasized 3 words, in those days. So we could get a picture of really what Jesus was doing. So I want to build up on in those days when people, particularly the religious leaders of that day, wanted to kill Jesus, but they could not. Okay, they could not. So I want to show you something else over here in Matthew chapter 14. And as I was looking at this chapter today, I thought I'd maybe start in the middle of this chapter, but can't do that. We're going to have to start at the very beginning, so that way you'll have a good overview. But I want you to understand that this is very, very powerful. And so I'm going to start at Matthew chapter 14, verse 1. Okay, and it says here, at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus and said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him." So now Herod, he had heard about Jesus and what he was doing throughout all the region of Judea. And it says in verse 3, Matthew chapter 14, verse 3, "For Herod had laid hold of John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. Because John had said to Herod, 'It is not lawful for you to have her.' And although he wanted to put to death John, Herod feared the multitude because they counted John or him as a prophet." So John the Baptist was quite well known, and Herod didn't really want to do anything to John. But because of Herod was with his brother's wife, the lust that was going on in him, she influenced him to proceed to do what he's about to do here. I'm picking up in verse 6. I want to give you some background. Okay, so when Herod's birthday was celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Okay, now so the daughter, now I want you to see this scene. This is at his birthday party. They're drinking, eating, having a good time. Probably a lot of nakedness is going on. So Herod is getting his sexual juices all turned on. He's hot. And then it says, therefore, Herod promised with an oath to give Herodias whatever she wanted, whatever she would ask for. And so she says, having been prompted by her mother, this is the daughter saying, "Give me John the Baptist's head on a plate." And the king was very sorry. However, nevertheless, because of his oaths or vow, and because of all those who sat around with him, he commanded it to be given to her. Look at that. So I want to sort of emphasize the scene here, because here Herod orders John to be murdered in prison. There was no trial. There was nothing given to John. I want you to see this here. You know, even in our day, when there's a convicted, or we could say an accused murderer, somebody that does wrong, they give them a trial, generally speaking. But I want to emphasize this, that John did not get any trial or nothing. Okay? and he was murdered. This is what Satan and the evil kingdom and all of its influence, this is how they operate behind the scenes. Many people, I need to emphasize this, many people, even in our current generation in the 21st century, have a difficult time living in an awareness of the evil kingdom that is at work 24/7, okay? Now, so I want you to see this operation is working through Herod and through the lives of people. Now, verse 9, Matthew chapter 14, verse 9, and the king was sorry. However, because of the oath and because of those who sat with him, he commanded it to be given her. So even though inside, Herod knew he was doing something what? Wrong. Now, case in point, all people walking on the face of the earth know the difference between right and wrong because it's born in you when you come into the earth realm, okay? You don't even have to be taught. You don't have to be instructed. It's part of the human nature. Now, what happens is people sort of cover it up for a period of time, but eventually it's going to come out. Now, verse 10, so he sent and had John beheaded in prison, decapitated. Now, I just want to interject this. My wife and I, we've been watching Games of Thrones. And I'm sharing this with you guys because I had no clue or idea that it even existed. I actually heard in prayer, the Lord told me to see it because there's a lot of spiritual overtones within the movie that relate to how we live in the earth today, actually, from a spiritual sense. So I'm going to interject some things here. So anyway, verse 10. So he sent and had John beheaded in the prison, and his head was brought in on a plate and given to the girl. This is his daughter, Herodias' daughter. And she brought it and gave it to her mother. You know, in this Game of Thrones series, they have 7 kingdoms that are jogging, you could say, positioning for who's the biggest, baddest, strongest kingdom. And it's quite interesting that these kingdoms, although they're in the same earth realm, they're actually fighting and competing with one another. And so in verse 12, it says, now this is, we're going to transition here. I'm going to show you something here, how prayer comes into play here. I want you to watch this very, very closely because this is a pattern. I call it a pattern, a prayer pattern. I'm terming it prayer patterns, okay? Because when there's a pattern of behavior, a pattern of thinking, a pattern of believing, a pattern of seeing, then it creates reality, okay? It creates for you in your life what you have, what you experience, and who you ultimately become, okay? So verse 12 is very important. So then the disciples of John came and took away the body of John and they buried it. And then what did they do? They went and told Jesus. Now, usually when people get disturbing, troubling, bad news, the first reaction is of an emotional reaction. Particularly if someone close has been killed, murdered, tragic, human nature feels down and sad, okay? So I'm slowing down here because I want you to see that this activity was a direct attack by the devil using the cooperation and the collaboration of Herod, Herodias, and her daughter to murder to murder John in order to weaken Jesus's ministry and life and everything, his reason for being here. Okay, I want you to see that. Now, verse 13, is another very important verse in this whole chapter, because it shows and demonstrates to us how Jesus reacted to the bad news. Most people, when they react to bad news, the first mistake that we all make is we want to do something physically in the natural realm ourselves. But Jesus doesn't do that. Look at verse 13. When Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. Now, before this video, the last video I talked about, in those days when they were plotting to plant a kingdom, what did he do? He departed and went to a place to be alone, to do what? To pray. To pray. Your first response, if you learn this now, it will be absolutely impossible for Satan, the fallen ones in that spiritual dimension, to ever take you out of this life by force. It's an impossibility. If you learn how to pray more than anything else that you know how to do and study and want to learn how to do in this world, it will be impossible. That's what God told me. It is impossible for you to be forced out or snatched out of this life by force. By force, I mean plane crashes, sickness and disease, sudden disasters, any and everything that has to do with destruction. Satan cannot do it. And Jesus is demonstrating what he did when bad news comes, because bad news is going to come. Jesus, so it says that he went to a deserted place by himself, and he went out there to go pray first. That's the first thing you do. Now, verse 13, Matthew chapter 14, verse 13. But when the multitudes heard it, now when everybody else heard about John being murdered, what did they do? They followed Jesus on foot from the cities. But now, they didn't follow Jesus on foot on the cities to go pray. What they're doing is, it's like when bad things happen, we look for relief from somebody in the natural. We look for people, relatives, friends, a spouse, something out here to comfort me. That's what these people were doing. So they heard where Jesus was, and they're going after him to get the comfort. Now, I believe many of these people were upset and angry at Herod, and they were going to Jesus to go see, well, let's take up arms and go attack the palace. Now, that's how in the natural world order of the kingdom of men, that's how they fight first. But in God's realm of the arsenal of the warfare of heaven, they don't fight like that. They can, but it's not necessary. Hold on. Now, verse 14, here's what Jesus answered. This is his answer to Satan from murdering John. It's Matthew chapter 14, verse 14. Now, when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude of people, and he was what? Moved with compassion for them. And what did he do? Healed their sick. That was the bombshell that Jesus dropped on Satan. I want you to see that. He replied with healing the sick. He replied with going in prayer before God, and then God, by his Spirit, led Jesus this way. He did have to build himself back up, because I believe Jesus was punched emotionally. You remember now, he's human and divine. So he felt that. When you get bad news of a relative dying tragically, or airplanes fall and they blow whatever, and you know that person, or you have some closeness with that person, you're going to feel it emotionally. It's going to be like a sad, grieving type emotion. But Jesus, what he did is he went into prayer to go be alone to pump himself back up. Because see, grief, too much grief, you're going to have grief. But if you stay in grief, it develops into other things like depression, stress. These are all things that are designed to break you down. Jesus knew that. Now, so he answered with healing. Now, verse 15. Now we're going to switch from John the Baptist being murdered now to another. So look how Jesus is so intent on his mission. He doesn't stop. Look at verse 15. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the people away that they may go buy for themselves what they need to eat." But Jesus said to them, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to Jesus, "Well, Lord, we don't have but 5 loaves and 2 fishes here. There's not enough food here, Jesus, to fill all these thousands and thousands of people. What are you talking about?" So Jesus said, "Have them." He said, "Bring them to me, the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes." At verse 19, Matthew chapter 14, verse 19. Then he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitude. I got a whole teaching on this. I can't teach it at all right now because we're talking about prayer. But what Jesus is demonstrating, and now, now watch this. John the Baptist, his first cousin. Now, this is like a first cousin. John and Jesus was only 6 months apart in age. They could have been both 33. I got 2 daughters who are like 6 months apart. So they were close. This is his first cousin. He'd just been murdered, but it looks like Jesus is unscaled. He's strong in the Lord, see? He felt it, but he didn't stay there. He had to keep moving. So then what he does is he not only heals the people, he supernaturally feeds over 5,000 men and women and children in a deserted place. So it says that he blessed and broke, gave the loaves to the disciples. Disciples gave to the multitude. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000. Look at that, 5,000. I believe it could have been anywhere from 10 to 20,000 people in one sitting. Now, so I want you to see, this is a second bombshell that was dropped. I call them a bombshell. I'm trying to give a spiritual connotation because I want you to see this is how we should fight, as it were. If you really want to hurt the evil one and his kingdom, then the more success, prosperity, and abundance that you experience of life, living, and being, the greater he's damaged. That's what the Lord told me. So it's not just for others, but it's in your life. If you look at the lives of people, everybody is going through something, either tragic, suffering. We all experience these things. But when we learn how to overcome those things and win and get the success, it does something detrimental, God told me, to the dark kingdom of Satan. It does. And it also does something to you. It raises you up to a higher ascendancy in life and living on the earth realm. Okay? Now, one thing I like about this Game of Thrones is they show how the king's attitude is. They're not timid. Most of these kings are very confident. And when they say something, they mean it. Not only that when they say something, things get done. You'll see Jesus doing the same thing. He's called the King of Kings. Okay? Now but God told me to show you this. Now, we're going to go to verse 22. How am I doing on my time, honey? I don't know how much time. This is a lot.
20.
20 minutes already. Okay. Whew. All right. So I'm in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples to get out of the boat and then to go before him to the other side while Jesus sent everybody away. Now, they had been out here all day and night now. They ate, he taught, everything. Time to go home, okay? And when he had sent the multitudes away, watch this now, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now, when evening came, he was alone there. Okay, so again, I want you to see the prayer pattern here. So this is at least three times now, 3 instances within this these 3 occurrences where Jesus went to pray. I want you to see that 3 times. And we're not done yet. I'm trying to prove and show you from the book that Jesus did more praying alone than he did all this other stuff that you see. Because when he started doing the things that you see, it just looked like it was like automatic, but it wasn't automatic. Jesus, what he did is he drew from fellowship with the Father in the night season. So during the day seasons, he lived and walked in total supreme victory. And he's showing us this is how we should be living too. And you can. Now, I'm going to read Matthew chapter 14, verse 23 as I try to wrap this up. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now, when evening was come, he was alone there. Okay, so now he was there alone and he's in prayer and fellowship. Now, the disciples are on their way somewhere else to the other side. But the boat, verse 24, Matthew chapter 14, verse 24, but the boat was now in the middle of the sea, and it was being tossed by waves, and the wind was contrary. So the disciples now are in trouble. Now, in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them. Now, walking on the sea. Now, I'm going to bring up another thing I noticed about the Game of Thrones is there's a scene or there's one of these areas where they call them the watchmen that are on the wall. And in the scriptures, there are different types of watchers. The prophet is considered a watcher because he sees the future. But there are also these prayer watchers. Many times Jesus would say, remember when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he's about to be crucified, he told his disciples, look, you need to watch and pray so you don't go into trouble. The Bible calls the word temptation. Temptation is trouble. Now, if you're already in trouble, the way you want to come up out of the trouble is to watch and pray. Now, that means you're going to have to do what Jesus did. If you do what Jesus did, you'll experience what Jesus experienced. So here again, he's in prayer, but now he's been alerted by the GPS system of the Spirit of God, I would call it. You and I have GPS systems within us. I call it the Spirit of the living, eternal God. It's like a GPS system. So as Jesus is out there alone in the mountains praying and fellowshipping with the Heavenly Father, he gets an alert. I've experienced that. Maybe it's not an alert of trouble, but I know, like for my wife sometimes, there's different emotions that go off when I sense she's happy, trouble, or difficulties. And so the Spirit of God will shift my GPS system, and I just pray for her till it lifts. Now, it may not lift off her, but it lifts off me, which means when I get a lift off of me, she's going to be fine. So I don't care about it. Now, And then I'll see things during that day, week, month that confirm that. So the Lord teaches me when you're praying, you're oftentimes way ahead in the future, even though you're doing it in the present. Your prayer, when you do this type of prayer where you pull yourself away, like I've been trying to teach, you're dealing with things yet to come. Remember, Jesus said that the Spirit of God would show you and me things to come, the future. He's got a lot of different ways to show you. Sometimes he can show you while you're wide awake, and sometimes he'll show you while you're sound asleep in a dream. Now, verse 25, Matthew chapter 14, verse 25. Now in the fourth watch of the night, this is very significant now, Jesus went to them. So now, during the Roman, and they have what they call the watch hours, prayer watching hours. They divided the night up in 3-hour increments. So like the fourth watch would be the hours of 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 a.m. till about 6 a.m. That's considered the fourth watch. Now, it would go from 6 o'clock in the evening all the way to 6 o'clock the next morning. Remember, Jesus one time said, are there not 12 hours in a day? Well, there's 12 hours in a day, and then there's 12 hours in a night. So from 6 to 9 in the evening was the first watch. From 9 to midnight was the second watch. And then from midnight to 3 was the third watch. And from 3 a.m. to 4 would be the fourth watch. That way, 3 to 6 a.m. is the fourth. So sometime between 3 a.m. to 6 is Jesus coming toward them. See, he was out there in the mountains fellowshipping. Now he's walking on the sea. Now he's in the fourth watch of the night. Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. Look at that. So when you are doing true prayer, there are supernatural abundance. There's power. There's all kinds of things that happen. Okay, you don't have to make them happen. They're gonna happen if you're really connected with the one. Whatever problem you had or experienced, it'll be like no biggie. It is impossible to walk with God like this and not succeed in like everything. That's what Jesus is showing. Now here, verse 26, Matthew chapter 14, verse 20. And when the disciples saw Jesus walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a ghost. And they cried out for fear. Now, I did a little bit of research. In this area of Jerusalem, ancient Jerusalem, they had it was like a saying that if you see these fishermen, there were many fishermen that died on that sea. Sometimes they call really the Sea of Galilee like a huge lake. So if somebody died in that sea, and sometimes these fishermen, they had a belief that if they saw a ghost on the water, that meant you're the next one that's going to die. So that's one reason why these guys were scared, because people believed that they would see these spirits of the departed out there on the water at night. But now, look what happens when what they saw Jesus walk. They were troubled, saying, it is a ghost, and they cried out for fear. Now that's verse 26. But immediately Jesus said something to them. Be of good cheer. Don't be afraid. It is I. See that? So when Jesus speaks in the trouble, he brings comfort. That's very, very important. Whatever trouble, suffering, difficulty, challenge you're going through, Jesus will always speak the comforting words to you, not the discomforting words. When the discomforting words come in and the discouragement come in, who is that influencing that?
The devil.
That's of another kingdom. So we are the ones that make the decision and the choice as to who and what we believe. Remember in the Bible it says, whose report do you believe the most? Whoever you believe the most, whoever you give attention to the most, that's what you're going to have. So in spite of all the bad news, because you can't live here on the earth and not hear evil news. I'm not saying don't do that. We need to be aware. But remember now, we have something that is far greater. The Bible says greater is he. Why do you think greater is he that's in us than he that's in the world? But many people don't believe that, particularly when trouble comes. We believe that the trouble is greater than the greater one within us. So if you believe that that trouble or problem or difficulty or challenge is greater than the greater one within you, then so be it. What I'm saying, Jesus said, don't be afraid. This is something only you will know. And so Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And look what Jesus said. One word, come. Didn't have to repeat itself. And when Peter had come down, now watch this. When Peter had come down out of the boat, now that's his faith in action. Now this is very important. His faith was greater than his fear. Fear was still present, but his faith and belief in what Jesus had said was greater. Whenever your faith supersedes your fear, you'll have success in everything. And so and whenever your faith has some motion to it, when you put activity to it, it gets even stronger. And so Peter had, so look at it. Now see the activity of Peter? He gets out of the boat and he walked on water to go to Jesus in the middle of a storm. So this is Peter doing this now, not Jesus. Now Jesus encouraged him, just like me. I'm teaching, I'm sharing, I'm trying to give this to you. But now some of you are going to believe this, what I'm saying is true for you, and start practicing this. And some of you still will just be thinking about it. The ones that move from thinking to start practicing and doing, you'll start having better. You'll start experiencing the divine life and the supernatural plenty of God in every area of life. It'll be impossible not to, unless you just switch it off. So he says, and he walked on the water going. Now, verse 30, I'm going to close here. But when Peter saw that the wind was boisterous, what happened?
Began to sink.
No, it says he was afraid first. I want you to see this. In my Bible, it says he was afraid. So what happened is there was a shift. He went from and this happens to us too in life. When we see or experience something bad, the tendency is to shift from faith and have fear to supersede it. That's what happened. Why did that happen though? Why? Because he was already walking on the water. I'm asking you all out there, why did this happen? He's already walking on the water. It happened because he gave his attention. He took his attention off of what Jesus had said, come, and he was walking on the water, and he shifted his attention to the boisterous water. So when you change your attention towards something negative, when I say change your attention, I'm saying you're giving most of your focus, most of your conversation, most of your activity toward negative behavior, negative thinking, negative believing, and negative focus. You're going to get afraid. And when that happens, you don't sink all of a sudden in life, but progressively, what happens? You go down. So it says here that Peter, he said here, Jesus had come, and when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw, see that the wind was blowing, he shifted his attention, his focus, his energy shifted back to fear. So when you focus on fear too much, it's going to zap the life out of your faith. And you won't go down instantly. Not generally speaking. It takes a lot of fear to go down immediately. But progress. Satan, he's very patient. He'll wait. He sees that weakens you in that one area. He'll just keep pounding away, day after day, week after week, and you'll begin to go down. He was afraid and beginning to sink. He cried out. He said, look at that, saying, Lord, save me. Instantly, he shifted his focus back over to the Lord. When you cry out to the Lord, instantly, he can bring it right back up. But your focus and attention has to be given to him. And immediately, Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? You were doing so good, Peter. You can do it. So, Father, I'm going to close it right here. I thank you for this message that I've shared with all the people who can view this video today. Enlighten them, Lord, today with a spirit of wisdom and understanding on how these things work that stems from an intimate prayer life with you, that they may be strengthened in faith and to be able to walk on water in this world above all of its evil. In Jesus' name, so be it. Okay, everybody. Till next time, God bless you.